after going for 2 months, I come again, I hear giving. And you're like, Pastor, give me a break. I'm sorry this morning that you have found us in the same topic of giving. So bear with me, but I hope and I trust the Lord has something new and something sweet for all of us. And so 2 Corinthians chapter number 8, verses 1 to number 7. We are supposed to read all through to verses 12, but because of time, I will read verses 1 to verses 7. And now, brethren, we wish to make known to you the grace of God which has been given in the churches of Macedonia, that in a great ordeal of affliction, their abundance of joy and their deep poverty overflowed in the wealth of their liberality. For I testify that according to their ability and beyond the ability, they gave of their own accord, begging us with much urging for the favor of participation in the support of the saints. And this not us we had expected, but they first gave themselves to the Lord and to us by the will of God. So we urged Titus that as he had previously made a beginning, so he will also complete in you this gracious work as well. And so I just want to pose a question this morning to all of us. So when you think of coming to the service this morning, when you are thinking of coming here in the morning, what aspects of our worship service were you anticipating and looking forward for? What part of today's service have you been looking forward for as a person individually? Just answer that question in your heart. But hold on there till we get to the end of today's sermon. You'll get to realize which I and you should be able to look forward most every single Sunday as we come here in the church. So back to where we have read 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 1 and 7. So because of time, once again, I will not deal with all those verses. For today, we will be able to deal with verses 1 and verses 2 of where we have read. And so the background of this particular text where we have read, that is 2 Corinthians chapter 8, we understand back from Corinthians, 1 Corinthians chapter 16, if you are quite familiar with the letters of Apostle Paul, in chapter 16 of 1 Corinthians, as he comes to the end, he reminds the Corinthian church to give or to complete the collection that they were supposed to give to the church in Jerusalem. All the giving that Paul was asking the church previously was all aimed to go to the church of Jerusalem. Why the church of Jerusalem? Why did they need any contribution of any church back then to be given to them? Now remember, the church in Jerusalem is the very first church after Pentecost. Jesus told his disciples, wait for the Holy Spirit where? In Jerusalem. And so the church begins where? In Jerusalem. And so, in Jerusalem, where we are told the church began, 3 things influenced the church in Jerusalem to be in poverty and affliction back then. That is, 1, what caused the poverty of the Jerusalem church to the extent that Paul was calling other churches in the Gentile world to give to them? It is 1, the Jerusalem church was made up of pilgrims who had come to visit Jerusalem for many other religious purposes. And when they came, the pilgrims, they had the gospel in Jerusalem. And when they had the gospel in Jerusalem, they got saved. And so, because they got saved, many of them never went back home. And you remember in Acts, we are told some of them came all the way from Egypt and Syria and Libya. And so because they have been saved and back in their countries there are no churches, they had to remain in Jerusalem. Now remember, they are remaining in Jerusalem. 1, they have no homes. 2, they have no jobs and they have no livelihoods. So what do you expect? Poverty. So those are the congregants in Jerusalem church. Poverty after poverty. 2, there is persecution. Why? Remember, it was during the time of Judaism. Now, any Jew who converted from Judaism to Christianity was persecuted. Remember Apostle Paul, what he tells us in Acts chapter 7? He foresaw and he gave a declaration of Stephen to be stoned. Why? Because Judaism, that is the pressure and the belief of the Judaism. You cannot be converted from Judaism to Christianity, because they had crucified the same Christ the people were being converted to. So persecution was prevalent. And so when there's persecution, you expect people to lose their jobs, to lose their families, and to be scattered, and to lose their careers as well. And those are the members of the church of Jerusalem. And 3, the Roman economy had an impoverishing effect to the people in Jerusalem. Remember, those who were in charge of the governance back then, during this time, it's the Roman government. All the way Asia Minor, Macedonia, and to Israel, all of them, almost part of Egypt. That is Roman government for you. And so, because of that high taxes the Roman government exerted to the people, what do you expect? Poverty after poverty. Remember the familiar record of Acts chapter 2 and chapter 4, where we are told some of the disciples who were meeting the apostles used to give out their possessions and their resources to support the church. And that's where we find the story of Ananias and Sapphira. We are told they sold a piece of land. And when they sold a piece of land, they gave a half of the money. Why? Because they were living in kind of a communism, a society, where all of us, we used to give our possession for the greater good of our brothers in Jerusalem and the church. So the resources that they gave the apostles, that is Sapphira and the rest, Barnabas and those we are told in the book of Acts, of course depleted. Zilisha, why? Because there were not many of them. And the church, we are told, is thousands and thousands of people. And so you cannot sustain such a great number of people if you don't have enough resources. For quite a period of time, that sustained them. Over the time, the resources depleted. So what happens next? Crisis. And that's why we find Paul in the 3rd missionary journey. There are 3, 1, 2, 3. The first deals with the area of Israel. The second, he moves to the north part. And the final missionary journey, he moves to the Macedonian region, where we told he had a vision of a man calling him in a dream to go to the Macedonia. That's where we have the 3rd missionary of Paul. And some of the churches that he began in the Macedonian regions were Philippi, Berea, and Thessalonica. Those were the 3 churches in the Macedonian region, because Macedonia is the current name of the country called Greece. Where Greece is where the Macedonian churches were. And Corinth, this particular church, is on the southern part of the Macedonia. And so the Macedonian churches, as much as Paul is calling the Macedonian churches as an example, they ought not to be an example realistically when you think of the conditions they are in, as we will look afterwards here. Because of their persecution, because of the impoverishing effect of the Roman economy and taxes, they should not be, using our normal logical sense, be an example to any church. Because we expect them to give reason as to why not to participate in the grace of giving. But we are told they excelled beyond any other. They became the exemplary example for me and you and Corinth on how the blueprint of giving is. So this morning we will be looking 3 characteristics of what devotee Christians do with their giving. In other words, characteristics of the devout Christians giving. Devotees, those who are committed, those who are passionate, those who are pious in Christianity. So we want to look 3 characteristics. Of course, there are more than 3, because if you read that particular text, verses 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 6, there are more than 7 and 10 characteristics. But today we will just narrow down to 3 of them. So, characteristic number 1 of the devout Christian giving is their giving is motivated by God's grace. The giving of devoted Christians is motivated by grace. And no wonder, on Sunday, the one who was preaching, the overall theme is the grace of giving. And we understand from the normal languages we talk, grace is the unmerited favor that you and we have. Oftentimes, when we think of grace, we will think of our salvation. But today, I want just to add something more on top of that. That in light of our salvation, in light of our justification, sanctification, adoption, and glorification, giving it part and parcel of that grace. Why am I saying so? If you have an understanding whom we are giving to, one, we are giving to the King of Kings. We are giving to the Creator of all that we have and we can see and not see. A king will not require our money. For example, our giving here will not make God to be better. He is perfect by who he is by himself. In other words, even if you give 1 million, it does not add any value to the nature of God. It does never. It does not increase the riches of God, and it will never. Why? He is the owner of all